In this video, we'll learn how to create a replicated chat inside Unreal Engine 4 using blueprints. Replicated means that it can be used in multiplayer games, no matter if it's LAN or any other type of connection. If you want to learn more about Unreal Engine 4, how to make games using it, and all types of game development related stuff, start right now by subscribing. Last but not least, thanks to all the patrons that support me. And now, let's get into the tutorial. We are going to start things off in a third-person template, which is almost the default for me. One thing I did is in the third person character, I added a string variable called player name. This is going to represent the name when we type in chat, and also in order to set this, what I did in the level blueprint is to make a small event begin play system to choose the names. So usually in multiplayer games there are going to be some systems to set the name of the player. So for example, you can have a username and a password to log into an account, and that account is going to have a name. Okay, but for me, because that's not what we are doing in this tutorial, and I wanted to do something easier than that for me, is that on event begin play, I check if the client, if our player is a client or a server. If it's a client, then the name is going to be player 2, and then if it's server, the name is going to be player 1. And that is because we are only going to have two names, because I'm only going to test with 2 players. But of course this is going to work with however how many players you want. Doesn't matter at all. Okay, now the first thing that we are going to create is going to be a chat line. A chat line is the line that appears in the bottom left corner when someone types in the chat. So let's go to content browser, user interface, widget blueprint, and I'm going to call this widget underline chat line. Let's get in here, and now let's go to field screen, custom, and set the width to be 600 and height for 40. Of course you can change these however you want, but for me these two values are going to fit. Now let's get an image, put it in here, and now let's set the anchors to the bottom left option, bottom right. Now let's set all the offsets to be 0. What this is going to do is to make sure that it fills the entire canvas, so we don't have to worry about text going over this image. Now set the color and opacity to black and the alpha to 0.6. Now what this is going to do is to make sure that this is somewhat transparent. Then let's go to... Actually, I think that's everything we have to do for this image. And now let's drag a text component. Doesn't really matter where you place it. Make sure that the anchors are in the top left corner. And then just make sure that the text is not right on the side. Okay, now the very first thing that we have to make sure we do to this text is to set size to content. This is very important, and what it does is that no matter how much I type, the component is going to resize itself after the text. So as you can see, the green border is going to get bigger if I type more, but if I'm going to delete text, then it is going to be smaller. Okay. Now one more thing that we can do is to go to font, typeface, and change the font and how it looks. Of course, if you have something else than the default, you can go on and use that. And I think that's basically everything we have to do in the designer. One more thing is that an animation has to be created, and I'm going to call it fade out, and it is going to do exactly what the name suggests. We are going to use this to fade out the text and the image in the background. So after X seconds, let's say for example 15, we don't want the text to be readable anymore. But of course, if you want to do it another way, you can put everything in a scroll box and then let the player scroll to that and see previous messages as well. Let's add both of the components in the track and get some render opacities in here. For the 0 second, we are going to have both points with a value of 1, and then 0.5 seconds later they are going to have the value of 0. So now you can see them. Actually, you can't see them anymore, and if we are going to play this, you're going to see a smooth transition between the two values. Okay, let's compile, and then let's go to graph. Here let's delete almost everything. Let's only leave the event construct and have after it a delay. So after this delay, what we are going to do is to play the fade out animation. Play animation. Okay, and this is almost everything we have to do in here as well. One last thing, we have to set the duration, and as I said in my example, 15 seconds is going to be what I'm going to choose. Compile, and I believe that's everything we have to do in this blueprint. So now that we created the widget chat line, it's time to create the actual chat. So again, the same process, user interface, widget blueprint, widget underline chat, but this time we are going to use the entire screen. So we're not going to set the fill screen. Okay, now the first thing that we have to create is a multi-line text box. Edit in here, and let's make it a little bit bigger so it's visible to the player. Now I'm going to style this real quick and also set some things, and then I'm going to let you know what I did. So as you can see, now this looks different. What I did first of all is to set the anchor to the bottom left corner. Then in the hint text I said say something to everyone, right? So the player knows what this is going to do. Okay, for the images, for the normal one I set it to black with a little bit of opacity. For the hovered, less opacity for the background, and then for the focused is basically the same as hovered. All of them are complete black. Then I didn't change the read only, and for the fonts, both the first one in style and in text style are going to be Roboto Tiny, the typeface light, with a size of 12, and that's everything we have to do for this one. Okay, now let's go to the graph and create a new custom event. I'm going to call this open close chat. Okay, and what we'll do is to make sure that this is a variable. We'll get it, we'll have a make array, and we'll also get a for each loop. Okay, let's plug this in here and then get a set visibility. Plug the loop body in the set visibility. The target is going to be the array element. Okay, and then plug in the make array the multi-line editable text box. Okay, now plug the invisibility in the event, and now this is going to create an input. Okay, so now we can set through this event, if you're going to call it, you can see that we can set the invisibility, visible, collapsed, hidden, hit test invisible, and self hit test invisible, which are basically going to set the visibility of all the components that we set in this array. Now the reason that I'm going to make an array for this and not simply set visibility is because this way we are going to get a more dynamic system, which means that if you have something else in the chat that you also want to hide, then you can just add a new pin and add that into the array. It's a lot easier for you and it doesn't cost any performance. Okay, let's close this down and let's go to the third person character. First thing we'll do is to get begin play. Okay, now get controlled locally. So is controlled locally. Okay, and now what this does is basically going to check if the character is going to be controlled by a player. And this is the first thing that we have to do in event begin play. And let me show you why. First of all, let's get event begin play and print a string. Okay, now let's minimize this, go to the play tab and number of players 2. Now if we are going to play this, you'll be able to see in the top left corner that we have, so let's see that one more time with longer duration. You set this to be 10, alright. So now if you look at the top left corner, you can see client 1 hello, client 1 hello, server hello, and server hello. Why is that twice? Well, that is because we first have to have this branch if it is checked locally, if it is controlled locally. Okay, put this in here, and now let's test this one more time. Play, and now you can see that client hello and server hello. And even if we get more players, it is still going to work. You see, client 2, client 1, and server. Okay, so now that we got this out of the way, what we're going to do is to create widget, and the widget is going to be the widget chat. Let's promote this to a variable. I'm going to call it chat, and then let's add this to the viewport. Now if you're going to play, you will be able to see it in the bottom left corner, right? If you're going to press Shift F1 for for the mouse, and then will be able to hover over it and see the changing color, and then you will also be able to type anything you want in it. But currently we don't want to start with the chat opened, so let's go back to the widget chat and set the opacity of the widget to be hidden. We go to behavior, visibility, hidden, compile, and that should be it. Now one thing that we have to add in the widget chat is a variable called player that is going to be the type of a third person character. Okay, now let's click on this eye right here, and then also let's go and check expose on spawn. Now what this will do is that we can input in the create widget node, we can input this variable. But I think first we have to close it down and reopen it. Okay, then if this doesn't work, let's get this one more time, create widget, widget chat, and then I can see the player right here. Okay, and now we can input it right in this blueprint. Plug that in here, and now we are going to have everything we have set up, everything that we need set up in our widget. And if you wonder why this is going to be useful, right now it isn't, but later when we are going to submit the text from the multi-line editable text box to the chat, then that is going to make a lot more sense to have the player already referenced in the widget. Okay, now let's go again in the third person character, go to edit, project settings, and go to input, and let's create a new action mapping. I'm going to call this use chat. I'm going to bind it to my T button. Okay, now let's get in here, use chat. Okay, let's create a new boolean. I'm going to call this is using chat. By default it should be false. Now let's have here a branch. The condition is going to be is using chat, and if we are using chat, then we want to set this to false. But if we are not using chat, we want to use it, which means true. So basically this acts as a flip-flop node. It is going to alternate between the two pieces of code. Okay, now what we want to do is to get chat and call the open close function. When we set this to false, we want to close it, which means hidden. When we set this to true, we want to be able to view them, so visible. Okay, now let's get player controller, and what we'll have to do is to set input mode game and UI for the open close chat with visible, and then for open close chat hidden we will do that with set input mode game only, not UI as well. For the inner widget to focus, that is going to be the chat, but more exactly we need to get the multi-line editable text box and plug that inner widget to focus. And now when we are going to press T, you will be able to see this popping. If we are going to press somewhere on our viewport but not on the widget and press T again, you will see it is appearing. And also by setting this, by having this set input mode game and UI with the inner widget to focus, when we press T, we are already going to be able to type anything we want in here. We won't have to select it manually. If I'm going to deselect this and then play, by pressing T, nothing is going to happen. I'm not even going to have my cursor on the screen, which is not what we want to happen. Okay, so once again, that's what has to happen. Then you can press T once again, and you will be able to close it. But to be a little bit more accurate with this behavior, let's also set show mouse cursor from the player controller. When we hide it, false. When we show it, true. So this way, even if we click somewhere on the viewport after getting the chat, we can reselect the chat just in case, so we don't automatically close it. And again, you can type. So that's what we have to do with the use chat function. And also let's create a custom event. Custom event open close chat, and plug this in here. And just to make this a little bit cleaner, on pressed call open close chat. Alright, so now we got all the functionality we need to open and close it. Currently there are two problems that we need to fix real quick. First of all, if I'm going to open my chat and then click somewhere else, then I'm going to be able to move, which is something that we don't want to happen. And also, you might see that I'm not going to be able to move my camera, but if I'm going to press any of the two buttons on my mouse, then I'm going to be able to drag it around. So in order to fix that, what we'll have to do is to go to the movement input and mouse input and check if is using chat is true or false, because of course it has two states. So have two branches, condition is using chat, and if it is not using chat, which means false, then add the inputs. Okay, and then for movement input, same thing, branches with false. Make sure you don't get the wrong node, and either execution pin. Okay, one more time, and now everything should be fixed. Let's check it. I'm going to press T, I'm going to press somewhere on the screen, and then I'm going to try to move. As you can see, I'm not being able. If I'm going to press any of the mouse buttons and drag it around, you can see that nothing happens, but my cursor is going to disappear. That's not a problem. Let's close this down. And then one more problem there is that we have to set the awning player for the widget, because we are going to use that a little bit later. So let's get player controller. And by the way, the player index doesn't matter. Just plug this in here. Let's compile. And now everything should be fine. Let's close this down and go back in widget underline chat. And in here in the graph, let's go to functions, override, and go to on preview key down. But before doing that, let me first show you something. If I'm going to go in the game, press T and get a chat. If I'm going to type something and then press enter, which is usually the button to send text, you're going to see that a new line appears. So I can scroll up and down, but this is not what we want to have, alright? We want, well, when pressing enter, we want to send a text. So by overriding the on preview key down, this is not going to happen anymore. Okay, now the first thing that we have to do is to get a handled node and plug that into the return value. If we are not going to do that, we are going to get an error, which we want to avoid. Okay, now from in key event, let's get key and check if this is equal to enter. If that is true, we are going to continue with the blueprint. So we are not going to use the false part. Okay, and now as I said, we are going to use the owning player. Get owning player, then get controller ID, get controller, get player controller, and then is input key down. And we are going to check for left shift. If left shift is not down, which means we are not pressing it, then we are going to do something, but actually we are going to do something with both returns, true and false as well. From false, we'll need to create a new variable. I'm going to call this number of lines. It is going to be an integer, and the default value is going to be 1, because we are always going to have one line at least. On false, we are going to increment this value, which means that we are going to set this to have +1. If we go into the macro, you can see what happens. Basically, we are going to set the value of number of lines to be itself +1. If you go to play and access the chat, if you're going to press shift enter, you can see that there are going to be multiple lines created again. This is what's going to happen. And by having number of lines here, we are going to use that right now. Actually, what we'll have to do is to get multi-line editable text, get text, I think it is, yeah. Then to string, and we are going to get length by typing len. Okay, and we want to check if this is less or equal to number of lines multiplied by 50. So integer multiplied by integer. Okay, have a branch. And now let me explain what happens. So basically, we want to make sure that there are not too many characters in our text, because if there are too many, then it is going to look very ugly. So for example, if I'm going to type here a lot of letters and copy them, then they're not going to look very good, right? They're going to fill the entire screen. But by limiting how much the player can write on a single line, right? We can manipulate how much he can write by using the number of lines. Then we are going to kind of avoid how much the player writes. Okay. Now what we have to do, first of all, is actually before doing this check, we want to see if there is actually anything in our multi-line editable text box. So what we'll have to do is to get again the multi-line editable text box, get text, okay, then to string, and then we'll have to copy this value. So we're going to go to utilities, copy. Basically what this does is going to kind of create a new variable, but not really. And the reason that we have to copy the value is because we are going to use a replace node. And what replace does is basically going to get a source string, and then the return value is also going to automatically set the value of the get text, right? So for example, if I have a text hello there, and then for example I remove the white spaces, hello there is going to be written without any spaces between the words, right? It's also going to change the source string. Okay, and as I said, the replace node is going to get rid of characters from the source string. What I want to get rid of is the white parts, that means the blanks, and then I'm going to change the blanks from being blank to nothing. So I'm going to set from to be a spacebar, a hit of spacebar, and then to is going to be empty. Search case, ignore case, because the spacebar has no case, right? It's not uppercase or lowercase. And then we want to check if this is not equal to nothing. So basically we want to, after eliminating all the blank spaces from the source string, if we are still left with any other characters, doesn't matter what it is, it can even be a sign, then we are going to go on with the blueprint, because we don't want to have a line that has no text in it, so it's basically white spaces. Okay, and now we are not yet going to continue with the blueprint, because what is going to follow is something a little bit more complicated, and we have to do something else before that. So let's go to event graph, actually let's go to designer, let's go to, actually you have to go to widget chat line, go to designer, go to the text block, and for the text we have to create a bind. And now we have to create two new variables. First is going to be called player, and it is going to be a string, and the second one is going to be called text, and it is also going to be a string. Then let's go to return value, and we are going to have string to text, so to text string, and from in string we are going to have append. What append does is basically going to combine all the strings that we input in here together. For example, if I'm going to put player in A, then I'm going to put here a column and a white space, and then the text, they're going to get combined. So if the default value for player and text would be their names, we would have player, column space, and then text. Okay, and that is everything we have to do in the binding. Now let's go to both of these variables. Okay, set instance editable, and then go to expose on spawn. Now everything should be fine in here for now. Let's go back to graph in the other widget, and let's see what we have to do here now. So first let's start with the false part. What we'll have to do is to get player, open close chat, and what it is going to do is going to close the chat, right? Because it's already opened, that means that the boolean is going to be true. So we are going to get this part. Okay, then let's get a multi-line editable text box, set text, okay, with no text in here, and then set number of lines back to 1. Okay, now let's plug this in the return node. We can copy this and put it in here, but before setting the number of lines and multi-line editable text box, we are going to have to fire custom event from the player. So let's go to third person character, add custom event. I'm going to call this use chat, and now let's create some inputs. First of all, we're going to have one called player name, one text, and one number of lines. And probably, as you guessed, the first two are going to be strings, and then the last one is going to be an integer. Okay, and now let's go to replicate, and from not replicated, let's go to run on server, and also reliable. Okay, and now here let's get the player, and let's call use chat. The player name is going to be the name of the player variable, so get name, plug this in player name. Then the text is going to be the multi-line editable text. Okay, so copy this, get text and toString, and then the number of lines is going to be the variable number of lines. And make sure that you set these variables after you call the function, so you don't reset them and have no value in them when you call it. And now let's go back to the custom event and let me explain what run on server does. So basically, this is the type of function or custom event, however you want to call it, that is called by a client, and it goes straight to the server to get authority for it. So basically, using this custom event, we can use nodes such as get all actors of class, right, and then use the for each loop to manipulate variables and all that, because the client cannot do this, right? The client cannot get all actors of class, only the server can. Now let's see how we are going to set this up. Let's get get all actors of class. Okay, the actor class is going to be a third person character. Get a for each loop. And now let's first create a new custom event. I'm going to call this enter text. And again, we have to create 3 inputs. They are going to be the same inputs as the use chat function, player name, and text, and then number of lines. These two are going to be strings. Okay, and let's call it here. From the array element, call enter text. Okay, the player name is going to be the player name, text, and number of lines, its own variable. Okay, so now let's see how we set up the enter text. We are going to need to first check if chat is valid. And actually, before setting it up, let's go into it real quick. Replicate, and let's go to multicast. So what it does, let's read actually what it does, be more accurate. Replicate this event from the server to everyone else. Server executes this event locally too. Only call this from the server. So basically, if you are a client, you cannot call this function. So this is why we are going to call it from the use chat, because the use chat is going to be called by the server, right? Because it's always going to run on the server, and that way we can also access get all actors of class. And then by getting the for each loop, we can call with a multicast to all of the third person characters and players. Okay, now let's go. From isValid, create widget. The widget is going to be the widget chat line, but before selecting it, let's go into the chat widget line and make sure that we have the instance editable and expose on spawn selected. It seems that we do. Let's select it. And now in the player, we are going to have the player name, and then in the text, we are going to have the text. Okay, let's compile. And now let's see how this is going to look so far. Let's press T, type something, press enter, and nothing really happens. That is because probably this is not going to be displayed, because there's nowhere to display it. First of all, because we haven't added it to the viewport. But if we would add it to the viewport, let's see. Let's do the same thing. So now you can see it, player 1, something in the top left corner. Now this is not what we want to happen, because you can currently see that the screen got darker. And also this is in the top left corner. This is not where we want it, in the corner. So to fix that, let's go to chat, the widget chat, and create a scroll box. Let's create it. Also sized content, and let's add to it the widget chat line, a default one, so we can place this better in the editor so it fits. It's pretty close. You can leave it like this or make sure it's perfect. However you want, doesn't really matter. Just make sure you delete the widget chat line after you're done. Okay, let's go to graph. Not graph, let's go back to a third person character. And now delete the add to viewport, and instead of that, let's get chat, get scroll box. First we have to make sure this is a variable. This variable. Okay, get scroll box, and then add child, and the content is going to be the return value. Let's play. First we have to also compile the widget chat. Okay, now we should have no error. Okay, play and type something, and you can see it appearing in the bottom left corner. Let's do it one more time. Something, right, with player 1, with the column, the space after the column, and the text that we typed. If I'm going to type something and something, so we have more words, that is also going to appear. But currently there's one error, as you can see. The text is going to be overwritten kind of by the multi-line text box, right? It's not in the right position, so they're going to overlap one and the other. And you can also see the animation playing from the chat line. Okay, now we have to see how we deal with moving upwards the scroll box, so the text multi-line editable is not going to overlap with the scroll box and the chat lines. In order to fix our problems, first of all, we are going to get again chat, get scroll box, and then we are going to get children count, and we want to check if this is equal to 1. And of course we are going to get a branch, and if that is true, we are going to get another branch. Not yet going to set this up. Again, another branch from false as well. And now what we want to check here, if this is equal to 10. So if the children count is equal to 10, then what we are going to do is to get again the scroll box and remove the child with index 0. So remove child at index 0, and then that's everything we have to do. So what it does is going to make sure that there can't be 10 messages on the screen at the same time. Of course you can increase it, decrease it, however you want. Okay, and then from false, what we'll do, again get the scroll box, and we are going to get this. We are going to get slot as canvas slot, because this way we can get access to set position, and the position is going to be the position of itself, so the x is always going to be the same, but the y is going to be subtracted by another float, and this float is going to be a float multiplied by an integer. The float is going to be 40, and the integer is going to be the number of lanes. Now let me explain all these numbers. First of all, we are going to have here 40 because the height of widget chat line is also 40. Okay, and then first let me demonstrate you. If you are going to play and type a normal line, we are not going to have any overlaps. But if you are going to type with multiple lines, so multiple lines, you can see the overlap in here, which is not something we want to happen. And now we can do this. Let's compile. Let's type first a message and type another one. So something happened here. We'll have to fix that in a bit. But first, let's also set up this part. Oh yeah, what happened is that we haven't plugged this in here. So let's check that one more time. So now we can type as many messages as we want. You can see that going upwards, so that we are not going to have any other overlaps. Also, if I'm going to spam this, you're going to see some messages disappearing at some point. You can see, because we already have 9 messages. And in order for this to hold only 10 messages, we have to put 11. Right, because we have to have 11 after we created this one. Okay, and now let's also set up this branch from the true part. Again, we are going to need to see how many lines we have on the first message and see how many times we want to get that upwards. So the check is going to be if we have 2 or more lines. So we want to see if the number of lines is bigger or equal to 2, because as you saw, if the number of lines is only 1, which means we only have a line, then there's no need to do anything because it already looks good without any overlaps. Okay, so from true, we're not going to use false for this one. We are going to get once again chat, get scroll box, slot as canvas slot, and we are going to set position. Okay, let's get one more time, get position. X is going to go in X. First, let's split it. Okay. For the Y, what we'll do, once again from Y subtract, so float minus float, and this time again integer multiplied by a float. The float once again 40, but this time for the number of lines, what we're going to do is to subtract 1. So let's see if we can get this right the first time with a reroute node, so it looks good. Integer minus integer, so we are going to subtract 1. Let's move this here and plug this in the integer. Okay, and now everything should be fine. Once again, make sure that you plug this in the Y. You don't get any errors. Now let's type on multiple lines. So as you can see, it went upwards from the first time. Let's play one more time with 3 lines instead. And you can see going upwards once again. Now, as you can see on the other screen, on the client, you can see the chat. If I'm going to chat on the client as well, let's see something, you can see it appearing on the server as well. So this works perfectly fine. And that is everything that we have to do in Unreal Engine 4. Now, what we can do to improve this is to style it in Photoshop and maybe add other cool features to the chat. If you have any questions regarding the tutorial, let me know down below and I'll help you out. Special thanks to Xeon, Donald Anderson, Kamasutra Industries, Andrew Millspog, Nino, Daniel Moore, Diego Balarezo, Bruno Gomez, Gili, Stefan, Lucas Oliveira, Badr Al-Kahtani, Andrew Duke for supporting me this month. As always, the project files will be available for Patreon over Patreon. Thanks a lot for watching until the very end, and I'll catch you in the next one.